efficiency and competitiveness. I'm joined today by our spokesperson on social protection and social transformation, Dr. Angela Brown-Burke, Member of Parliament. I'm also joined by our spokesperson on trade and global logistics, Member of Parliament, Anthony Hilton. I must also apologize for the absence of our spokesperson on local government and democratic reform, Natalie Nita Garvey, Member of Parliament. We have called this press conference today in light of an Auditor General's report that has produced scandalous findings about the government's management of hurricane relief funds that were donated by generous Jamaicans. The contents of the report is very outrageous, and we believe it deserves the full attention of the Jamaican people. Of $1.44 billion donated to the government of Jamaica to support the relief efforts across the island in wake of Hurricane Melissa, the Auditor General found that 88% of that was unspent as at the end of February 2026, which implies that only $26 million of that $1.44 billion was directed towards relief efforts. That is unacceptable. We will expose the governance failure behind this, and we will demand that there be a clear plan of action presented to the Jamaican people with respect to how the remainder of the hurricane relief funds will be spent. We will also be examining the administration of the roofs program, which has been a dismal management. It has been a failure by all accounts, and we will explore that as well. The logistics of the relief efforts has also been poorly managed, and our spokesperson on logistics will speak to that. I will come back at the end of the press conference and I will talk about the financial mismanagement and the poor governance framework that has enabled the underspent of the donations that have been received by the government of Jamaica. But at this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'll hand over to our spokesperson on social protection and social transformation, Dr. Angela Brown-Burke. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As you heard before, I'm Angela Brown-Burke, Shadow Minister for Social Protection and Social Transformation. I probably want to start by just talking about the roof program. Well, all of how we handled Hurricane Melissa is really where I probably want to start. And I want to start because in any disaster, there's always a memorandum of understanding and collaboration between central government and local government. This time around, it was noticeably absent. And we saw that showing up in so many different ways. And in fact, a lot of even the challenges that we're having now is also because there is that absence. So if we start by saying that there was no MOU between ODPEM and the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. If we also start by saying that with the collaboration that was taking place, there was nothing that was documented. No roles and responsibilities of the different agencies were identified. And if we start in chaos, we must end in chaos. And so today, I want to speak to you on behalf of thousands of Jamaicans who are still living under tarpaulins, catching with friends, boxing boat, as we say in Jamaica. 7 months after a Category 5 hurricane devastated Western Jamaica. In the wake of that storm, Jamaicans at home and abroad gave generously, donating, as Senator Tomlinson has said, $1.44 billion to support survivors. More than half a year later, that generosity has not reached the ground. less than 2% has been spent. And as the AG reported that, we have to look around us and look at the people who are still waiting on that support. You might very well say that assessments are still being done and that victims are receiving benefits from other sources. But hold a second, we'll get there. The scope of the need is staggering. I don't know how many of us remember that in December last year, Red Cross actually estimated that there were 156,000 homes that were damaged and approximately 90,000 families who were directly affected. What this means is that all donations and all funds that would have been received would probably still not have been fully enough. There would be a gap. And that is why what has happened with the 1.44 billion sitting there with no plan is such a wicked act. These funds were intended to deliver shelter and to help hurricane victims. Instead, what do we have? Nothing but utter chaos. So the Auditor General's review has uncovered catastrophic deficiencies in governance, oversight, and accountability. The damning results: millions in funds and materials cannot be independently verified, and our most vulnerable citizens remain completely unprotected. The government roofs program, I want to talk about this a little bit. It was always intended to be the major vehicle through which hope would have been given to Jamaicans. The minister at a press conference, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, informed Jamaicans that 114,000 household assessments had been completed. That would be 73%. That optimistic, sanitized account does not match what persons are telling us on the ground. That's not what they're reporting. So let's look at the assessment so far. First of all, there's an acknowledgement that not everyone has yet been verified. And so the question is, for those who have not been assessed, what is the process? How do they make sure that their name is on a list to be assessed? And if it's not there, what is that fair, transparent system for them to get on that list so that they can be assessed? That's the first gap that we find. And I think any gap anywhere in this system is a problem based on where we are and how devastating Melissa was. So that's the first thing. Then let's look at those who have been assessed. The first thing we would say is that any system of assessment, any process by which individuals are going to be assessed needs to be fair, and it needs to be transparent, and there needs to be criteria, criteria-based. And some of us might think that there is some criteria, yes, because there is the major damage, the minor damage, and the total damage. However, we need to make sure that when persons are in fact assessed, that they are put in the category that they belong, that whatever errors there might be, human errors, that they are caught and that they are actually resolved. So let me tell you what I really mean by that, and I'll give you a real example. So let's look at what this looks like on the ground. Consider Miss X in Hanover. She was assessed. She was told that she qualified for a grant. Yet when she went to the parish office, she realized that they had misidentified her community. Yes? And therefore, she is now in limbo. We have Master Joe. His telephone number when he went to the office, his telephone number was entered incorrectly. A payment showed up in the system as processed, only to later disappear entirely. And we have heard the stories of individuals who spend their last little dollar to go to the office to get information and still can't even find their name on the file. Now, these are not isolated incidents. This is state-sponsored frustration. And something has to be done about it. We believe that it is important for whatever system that is being devised by the government to have those opportunities for individuals to query, for individuals to make sure that they are on the list, for individuals to actually even respond to assumptions. So we all know how Jamaican families are. Because my sister came and applied for a grant doesn't mean that we live in the same household, although it's the same big yard. Because I have my own little thing with my family right there. My sister, who lives right beside me, is in her own house with her own family. So when the minister says, and we all agree, that if you benefited once, you shouldn't benefit twice, we all agree with that. But how do we make sure that everyone that is denied because of an assumption like that, that it gets identified one, and that the research is done in a way to make sure that no needy person who should really qualify is disqualified? These are some of the issues that we have on the ground. Then some communities are called clusters. And there's a whole bunch of clusters that, as of yet, the government hasn't found a way to deal with. And we don't hear anybody talking about that. There, and I think I said it the last time I spoke as well, that there are damage levels that were actually altered after assessment, although they were inputted in the system correctly. What this means is that, I don't want to say secretly, but it means a change, a reduction in terms of what those families would have been entitled to, would have thought they were going to receive, in terms of what their conditions would demand. Again, there has to be a way to sort through these issues. For persons with missing TRN numbers, missing phone numbers, and just being missing from the very database that they should be in. I've said it before, that these data fixes are absolutely essential to ensure that every Jamaican who deserves to receive a benefit, that they do. Now, where the real problem is of course, the findings of the Auditor General. And probably the most shocking ones of this is that out of the 421 roofs reportedly repaired, the Auditor General could not independently verify not a single one to the required standard. Not even one. Just let that sink in and figure what that means. But in addition to that, there are no formal completion reports. There's no evidence that materials costing 167.3 million were actually delivered to or used for the intended beneficiaries. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security provided no written selection criteria, no evaluation process, and shockingly confirmed that verifying the construction that is taking place is actually outside of their responsibility. If the ministry isn't verifying it, then who is? Right now, absolutely no one is accountable for ensuring that the right families receive the right support. You know, Our members of parliament warned early that this program lacked accountability at the design stage. We have been saying that. They flagged deep concerns about partisan bias in how assessments and distributions were being handled. And today, based on the Auditor General's findings, they seem to corroborate a procedural failure so systemic that leaves the door wide open for exactly the kind of manipulation we were talking about. And in the meantime, families are exposed to the elements. Children's education is being interrupted. The mental and emotional strain must be awesome. I can't even imagine what that is like. Delays and lack of transparency are eroding public trust and severely undermining future donor confidence. Now, we talk about these issues not because we want to damage the reputation of Jamaica, not because we want to ensure that in the future it's more difficult for us as a country to receive donations. No, that's not why we do it. We do it because we understand the sacrifice that many made to make these donations. We also understand the need that exists and the fact that these individuals who are in need, for whom these funds were sent, have not been able to achieve what they could because their government failed them. We cannot fix damaged roofs with broken systems. We just can't. And so what we are demanding, as we have been doing, is full transparency. Publish full lists, verified lists of all roofs beneficiaries with clear parish level breakdown alongside the exact methodology used to select them. Our members of parliament, they have been asking for this. They are totally unable to track those individuals who come to them to say they were assessed or they thought they were assessed. They don't know where they fall. They have been totally unable to say, okay, I would have gotten 5,000 persons who came to my office. Let me see how many of them have gone through the system and how many of them have received something. It cannot continue like that. We also need independent verification, yes? Which would be able to publish an independent technical audit of all reported repairs. And this is extremely important. You have individuals who would have fixed their own house with a mixture of support from government and their own efforts. But yet, when they check at the parish office, it says that it was done by JDF, for example. Yeah, we have to sort out these things. Individuals who would have gotten a grant from TEF. I don't know how many persons remember that. We agreed with the minister when he said that if you have received from one program, you should not get from another. We agree. However, some government workers in tourism, in the same Ministry of Labour and Social Security, are individuals who were offered this assistance through TEF. But the TEF actually gives a bundle, 6 sheet of zinc, 6 slots, nails, yeah. But a modest contribution is what they made, which is okay, because there are many individuals for whom that would have made a significant difference. But what is the issue? The issue is my house is totally damaged and I get this from TEF. If you give me a minute on it back, I'm going to take it because I'm going to hold it to see how I could put together something to fix my house. But then I'm told that I do not qualify for anything else. It then becomes a problem, a real big problem. And so that is something that we have to look at. If individuals who have received benefit from TEF falls in the categories that are totally destroyed or badly damaged, how do we handle that? Yeah? We also need to stop forcing poor people to travel miles to get answers. We need a decentralized disbursement system as well as a query mechanism where people can easily ask and find information so they know what is the next step. In terms of what has gone before, I believe it doesn't end here. We still need to get some information from the government about how these funds have been spent, and if there are issues of accountability, if there are issues where contractors or officials need to be held responsible. We believe that this is the time when we have to make sure that action is taken. And as I close, I want to talk also about our shelters. Anyone in a shelter now is obviously someone who has absolutely nowhere to go. And for the last 2 shelter relocation, which were so badly handled, I think we need to also make that call. We need to treat these individuals with the dignity they deserve, understanding that if they could have done otherwise, they would not be in this situation today. So for the places to which they are being removed, we need to make sure that it is habitable, fit for humans to go there and to live. We need to also make sure that we are having ongoing, respectful conversations with these individuals. Not because you are in need, it means that person should speak with you, as we say, in any old way. You know, we are still human beings. These are still Jamaicans. You know, a 70-year-old man sent me a note to say that he has worked, and it touched me. He says he has worked all his life with government, giving to his country. He retired and he was fairly comfortable. He says he could never have believed that Melissa could have made him as destitute as he is today, with absolutely nothing to lean back on. And so on behalf of that 70-year-old pensioner who now finds himself homeless, I am asking the government to have a conscience and to make sure that we do better for our people. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, members in the audience and those online, you will hear more of the systemic problems and the issues that we are faced with in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa, and really the shambolic state of the response from the government. So while much attention is rightly focused on the financial management failures identified by the Auditor General, there is a parallel crisis unfolding in Jamaica's ports, warehouses, and cargo facilities that has received far too little scrutiny. That is, the breakdown surrounding donated and procured relief goods intended for Hurricane Melissa victims. individuals, community groups, diaspora organizations are being billed by freight and storage operators for delays caused by governmental inaction. In several documented cases, individuals and organizations have had to make the painful choice between paying fees that have ballooned over the weeks and months or abandoning the goods entirely. This includes goods for which charitable certificates, which are certificates waiving most fees and charges, had been obtained with great effort. Neither outcome is acceptable. When those items were destined for families who lost everything in Hurricane Melissa. Perishable goods, including food items, medical supplies, and other consumables, have been reported as having deteriorated or gone bad entirely, while awaiting clearance. This represents not only a waste of donated resources, but a profound failure of the duty of care owed to both donors and intended beneficiaries. Jamaica is not unfamiliar with hurricanes. The government had an obligation, particularly following the lessons of Hurricane Beryl in 2024, to have in place a clear, published and operational logistics protocol for receiving, clearing, and distributing relief goods in the event of a subsequent disaster. Nor is the annual Christmas choke point at the ports a surprise to the border agencies. This happens every year. Totally predictable. The Auditor General's report confirms that the disaster relief portal established by ODPEM in November 2025 was not used to generate reports on international donations and was only used as a means for donors to upload information. So it matters that they get the information, get the donation, but what happens to them, to the donation afterwards, is secondary, if it matters at all. A portal that receives information but produces no actionable management output is not a logistics system. It is a registration form. The result is that Jamaica presented itself to the world as a country in need of help, which we were, received that help, and then subjected the very people who responded with generosity to a bureaucratic and financial ordeal. That reputational damage extends beyond our shores, and it risks undermining future donor confidence in Jamaica's capacity to manage international assistance. We have to fix this. Small Jamaican businesses and diaspora-led organizations who mobilized quickly after Hurricane Melissa to ship relief goods are among those most severely affected. Many do not have the financial resources to absorb extended storage fees or the legal capacity to navigate the disputes that have arisen with freight operators. The government has offered no structured mechanism for relief, no compensation framework for donors who have incurred losses, and no public acknowledgement of the scale of this problem. That silence is not acceptable. So what then are the calls for action? The opposition calls on the government to immediately publish a full accounting of all donated goods that remain uncollected, in storage, or that have been abandoned at Jamaican ports and cargo facilities. Indeed, I would go further and to say they need to give a full accounting of those goods who they claim have been spoiled and shipped to the dump, because that record exists. The government must establish an urgent relief mechanism to waive or reimburse storage and demurrage fees incurred by donors of hurricane relief goods, and to facilitate the immediate clearance and distribution of any goods that can still be used. Looking ahead, the opposition demands that the government develop and publish a comprehensive disaster logistics protocol before the start of the 2026 hurricane season, covering customs clearance, port handling, cold chain management for perishables and medical products, and coordination with freight operators, so that what happened after Hurricane Melissa is never repeated. Thank you.
The Auditor General's report highlighted significant weaknesses in financial management, governance, and program accountability with very limited transparency. I started the press conference by highlighting that of $1.44 billion received in donations from generous Jamaicans and donors internationally, the government had only spent $26 million of that. And we have heard the argument being made by the government. Senator Marlon Morgan said that this demonstrates the need for NARA because bureaucracy was what impeded the spending of that money. Let's expose that argument for the untruth that it is. If you examine the Auditor General's report in its entirety, it will tell you that not only was 88% of the monies donated was unspent, but it was uncommitted for spending. There was no expenditure plan. Now, bureaucracy slows committed spending. When you have allocated monies for a particular project and you run into some bureaucratic delay, then it delays that. But if you did not commit the money for any particular expenditure, then how do you anticipate in that regard that bureaucracy would slow the spending? It is unconscionable that only $26 million of the $1.44 billion was spent. And when I think of the thousands of Jamaicans who were hungry, who were sleeping under buildings without roofs or damaged roofs, and to think that the government sat on this amount of money that could have been directed in relief efforts is very unfortunate. The financial mismanagement did not stop at the amount that was left unspent. There were monies that could have been received, that could have been directed in relief efforts expenditure that were lost because there was no proper management. In fact, the Auditor General's report said that a financial services institution withheld over $15.7 million in donated funds beyond the agreed 45-day window, as a result of there being no formal agreement between that entity and ODPEM. It demonstrates a lack of proper management of the entire relief program. And it is very unfortunate that Jamaicans, having faced one of the most devastating natural disasters in the history of our existence, had to put up with this kind of governance failure on the part of the administration. But beyond that, it appears to be a pattern, a very unfortunate pattern that must be highlighted. Because the Auditor General's report said that coming out of Hurricane Beryl last year, there was $138 million in donations that were unspent. So what we're finding here is that the government has a clear inability to make a proper expenditure plan to direct monies in relief efforts to assist the people who have been impacted by natural disasters. And this cannot happen. This has to be adjusted, particularly in light of the fact that we're heading into the 2026 hurricane season. Beyond that, the Auditor General's report found that there were clear breaches of compliance with respect to the National Disaster Fund. It says the National Disaster Fund held 163 million in its bank account and 203 million in investments as at February 2026. That is a substantial portion of public resources outside of the proper statutory oversight. In fact, the Auditor General identified 3 material areas of non-compliance with the Disaster Risk Management Act. The NDF has not been audited as a standalone fund for 5 consecutive years. And there were no annual reports and no statements of account presented. And there wasn't a dedicated bank account to maintain the funds directed from donations for the purposes of relief distribution and recovery. This is clearly problematic. You know, when I think of the amount of mismanagement, the degree of the governance failure, particularly the amount of monies that were left unspent, the question that I think we should ask ourselves is, if the monies were not directed towards relief efforts, what were they being left unspent for? But more importantly, I think we should ask, who were the monies being left unspent for? And when you ask those questions, I want you to think of the history of a litany of Auditor General's report that have pointed to misappropriation of funds, mismanagement, questionable acts regarding financial statements of account for auditing. This must be made public so that the Jamaican access to that information. All agreements governing the handling of donated funds in the immediate days after the passage of the hurricane. It was mostly donors because the government's response was lethargic, was suboptimal, was fragmented, and ineffective. It was the donors who came to the rescue of the Jamaican people. And